Syria is now totally isolated. Euronews explains. In this video,
with the popular uprising in Syria being ever more brutally repressed, on Monday Syria found itself being deserted by several Arabic countries and under increasing diplomatic pressure from the EU and USA. Saudi Arabia led the way, calling its ambassador in Damascus home for consultations, and King Abdulla called on Syria to stop its death machine before it was too late. The Saudis were followed in turn by Kuwait and Bahrain, calling in their ambassadors, and the Six-Nation Gulf Cooperation Council will soon meet to discuss the Syrian crisis. The Arab League also made its first condemnation of the violence in Syria, and Turkey's foreign ministers due in Damascus tomorrow morning, bearing messages from Ankara and Washington. The EU's special envoy for the southern Mediterranean region added his condemnation of the ongoing massacres.
We have made very clear that the regime has gone beyond what is acceptable for the international community. It's exerting an unacceptable violence against its population.
Human rights organizations in Syria claim the death toll is now well over 2,000, most of them civilians. The protests have now become daily events since first erupting on March the 15th.
now, with Saudi Arabia's intervention in Syria, the Sunni majority in Syria claimed this as a victory, a moral victory for them, because the Saudis see themselves as the patriarchs and defenders of the Sunni Muslim religion, whereas the Muslim Alawi sect who runs Syria under the crime family of Bashar Assad are now completely isolated because of the WikiLeaks cable that came out about the relations between the Saudi and Iranians. The Iranians are quite frightened of the Saudis because, of course, the Saudis are even worse than the Bin Laden crime family, and the Saudi crime family is imperialistic, as Michael Schur said, who was the CIA head of the counter Bin Laden unit, who was sought to capture or kill Bin Laden. Well, Bin Laden's dead, but the Saudis are still a major threat to the West and to their neighbours, and they see themselves as the leaders of all the Sunni people in the entire world. So they've pulled the Persian rug from under Bashar Assad, and by that I mean Iranian support, because the Iranians know that if Saudi Arabia comes on board, then the US is not simply just speaking about an intervention morally or economic sanctions or anything like that, that Hillary Clinton will be forced by King Abdullah and the Saudi lobby into some kind of action against Iran. And Iran is what gives Syria its organisation. Iran is what controls Hezbollah, right? And so, as I said in my last video, this leaves Likud isolated in Israel, and it means that the Israeli Labour Party can do an opening to a foe, which is to the Arab Spring, which means that the Israelis can, in effect, join the process of the Arab Spring to bring democracy to the Middle East. Now, as we've seen with the only country to, apart from Syria itself, in the Arab League, to oppose any intervention, either economic sanctions by the EU, as Bernard Leon, the envoy to the southeastern Mediterranean, said, was Lebanon. Because Lebanon, of course, is controlled by Hezbollah, which is controlled by Syria, which is controlled by Iran. And the Saudi king gave the Iranians an ultimatum. And this ultimatum the Iranians had to take seriously. Because whilst the Iranians make the distinction that they would like to make some sort of opening to the Sunnis, the Alawis do not allow this in Syria. And the Saudis make a complete distinction between Sunni Arabs and Shia Iranians, who are Persians. So there is the ethnic divide there as well, and this is why the Saudis invaded Bahrain in support of the Bahrainian crime family and royal family, and the Kuwaitis, of course, have followed suit, probably from American pressure, because they're the base. Bahrain and Kuwait are the base of the American Fifth Fleet. So all the major crime families in Arabia, who would have had some sympathy with Bashar Assad, because he is a crime family as well, leader of a crime family, and he doesn't want to be toppled. They don't want to be toppled. So the whole domino effect of the Arab Spring is now taking effect. So the Saudis might be the victims of that as well. And they want to be showing that they can reform, that they can make an opening to their foe, which is their own people. Which is why the Saudi king has done this complete hypocritical reversal and flip-flop of opening up a dialogue with his own people by criticising Bashar Assad. And with the Alawis now isolated within Syria, the communities of the Sunnis and the tribal areas in Syria can now start to see who is who and who supports Assad, and those people will be gradually isolated. In effect, if there are any relations between them and the Sunnis, those will become non-connections, as I've said in many videos on the value of non-connections in fighting terrorism. And what Bashar Assad is doing to his own people is terrorism. He's using tanks. He's killed 2,000 of his own people, and when it gets to the symbolic 3,000 mark, 3,000 people dead is something that the Americans will remember. Why? Because of 9/11, because of the Saudi and Bin Laden crime family sponsoring that attack to kill their citizens, and that's a figure that stays in their mind. When it gets to that figure, then the Americans and Europeans will have to come up with a moral argument as to why there should be military intervention. And they won't need much of a moral argument. Thousands of people have already been killed. But the Syrians and the Arab Spring protesters are brilliant people. They are brave people. They are coming out every day to protect their country and their nation from extermination by Bashar Assad's Alawi crime family. And we should support them with all means. We need as I said in my last video, a military solution and an economic new era for the countries that have become part of the Arab Spring. So we need a military Keynesian solution to the problem, and the solution may come through Turkey. Turkey refused during the Iraq War to support the Iraqi invasion, which removed Saddam Hussein, which obviously is indirectly related to the Arab Spring being able to see an Arab dictator removed by foreign powers, and it gave them the courage to do it themselves. But Iraq, interestingly, and Iran said that they would support Syria even if there were sanctions by the EU and the United States. But now Saudi Arabia is involved, and Saudi Arabia will unleash its operatives against the Alawi regime in support of the Sunnis, and also against Iran. And that is something that the Iranians didn't factor into this process. And that is something that Hezbollah will probably be unleashed against the Sunni states, which will weaken them in their struggle against Israel. So all in all, it's going in the right direction for the West to win. It just needs the EU and the United States to put the final nail in the coffin by deploying some kind of military force.